The virtual lead marketing conference continues with its focus on loyalty engagement, analytics, and digital application. I'm your host, John Karolewski. Thank you for joining us. We have 4 more presentations today on topics such as joint business planning, mobile marketing, and more. You can stay with us the rest of the day or just log into those presentations that interest you. Our next talk answers the question, where does the real power of technology reside? Now, this conference is interactive. If you have questions, type them in the chat box in the lower left of your screen. We'll answer them along the way as time allows, and also at the end of the conference. Registered attendees will be sent links to this presentation, recording, and all others, and also with supplemental materials early next week. Joining me now is Larry Burns, President of Start Sampling, an online promotional marketing services company that focuses on product sampling, research, and related media services. So without further ado, here is Larry Burns.
Thanks, John, and welcome, folks. Been listening a little bit to what's going on today. I was pleased to hear Keith mention free sampling as part of his conversation in terms of the things that are going on. So what I'm here to talk about is kind of a somewhat broader overview in terms of where the power of technology really resides from one man's opinion. I am going to, however, steal many things from many people. There is an old proverb about well stolen being half done, and I tend to agree with that. So you're going to see references in the deck to all sorts of other people's thinkings besides my own. I want to give you one page on who I am and what the bias is, and then just kind of refresh us a little bit or go over some of the things that are out there, some of the slides and some of the pictures that I may share may be similar to others you've seen or may be new to you. But it's really to talk about what's happening in the world of marketing in terms of how we as an industry are responding to the massive changes in, yes, technology, but even more so in humans, in what's happening to us as people and how we as individuals are interacting with brands, with marketing, with the technology, with the products, because it has fundamentally changed, and I think we're still struggling to adapt. Not surprising given the size and scope of many of the companies that many of us work in. It is something that is a challenge, but it's something I think there are some things we can talk about that might be just a subtle shift in the way in which we think about marketing that might help, because things have really fundamentally changed. So this is what I do for a living. Sorry for the busyness of the slide. Imagine it building, if you will. I run a company called Start Sampling. We've been around since last century, since '99, out here in the digital space. I think people refer to us as digital pioneers to some degree. But we've been working with a lot of brands we're very pleased to work with, their retail partners, and really we live in this, let's call it the digital ecosystem, because given who we work with and the brands that we work with, we're challenged and have been challenged now for more than a decade to help brands adapt to what's going on in the marketplace and where they need to be. So we pretty much have the model of we will work with everyone because that is what our brands desire. So we work with a plethora of agencies, myriad data vendors, logistics, transportation, all kinds of media partners. But we focus solely on sampling. And the presentation that we're going to go through is really not about sampling per se, but it is about how consumers are interacting with brands, and I'll just give you the one plug, which is we know that personal experience kind of trumps most everything, so sampling really does have a role to play. Many of you probably have seen this. This is the old reality, and we don't need to dwell on it. I love the fact that it's been, many people have used this kind of a slide. It's always males in hats with newspapers in black and white compared to today, which the new reality is truly this. One, it's no longer, American white males. Two, it's no longer reading in the traditional manner. Three, it's a varied set of all sorts of different devices and all sorts of different ways in which humans are interacting with media. And it has really changed consumer behavior in some fundamental ways. And some of this stuff, again, I say, is not going to be news to you. But the other piece of this is how incomprehensible the scale of the data explosion has been. let's go back to 10. Eric Schmidt at Google he made a comment that talked about all of the information created between the dawn of civilization, and some people said it was a little over the top, but that second bullet point was true then. And if you go back to 2002, and that was the third year of our company, the entire amount of information created that full year was now being created every 7 days in August of 2010. And now when we talk about it, we're no longer talking about exabytes, we're talking about zettabytes, which is even more zeros. But I have enough trouble with the 18 zeros there for exabytes. And the interesting thing about what's going on here, and I think many of you may know this, but the interesting thing is it's not just the data, it's where the data is coming from. You've got, just in terms of the device shipments that are happening globally, you've got this huge, enormous explosion of smartphones, yes, obviously, but tablets, TVs, wearables, things are changing. And because of the device shipment explosion, you're seeing a concomitant, if you will, explosion in the data. 2/3 of all this digital data or marketing data that's out there is created by people. Humans are leaving the trails and the breadcrumbs and giving us access, if you will, to all that information. That little red arrow, by the way, that's when the iPhone was introduced. So there is a cause and effect, perhaps. So you're going to see a continued change, right? And if you haven't seen this image, I love the guy on the top in 2005 at St. Peter's Square, the Vatican, announcing the new pope. There's that one guy in the lower right-hand corner there with his flip phone taking a picture. But look at the difference now to 2013. Same place, same event, right? That is where the power of technology lies. And where is that? That's in the hands of the humans, right? So we as a people have fundamentally been impacted and changed, obviously not just in the U.S., because this is obviously Italy, as that photograph is from. But the other thing that's happened to us is this onslaught of information coming at us, which has changed the way in which we as people react. You're going to see the next slide I'm going to show you is, in the left side is kind of how we're reacting to messaging, and the right side is kind of just a reminder here in the States of the kind of environment and context we've been in, and there's a point to showing you this because it really does speak to the fact that we as people are struggling. We're getting 5,000 messages a day. Almost 2/3 of us are on the do not call list. 86% of us skip TV ads. Again, many of you, these statistics are known, but it's nice from my perspective to kind of lay them all out and build the story here. I think for many of us, we're willing to watch an ad once or twice. I make my family crazy because I will, in fact, run back the DVR and say, I haven't seen that one. But, reach and frequency, don't need the frequency. You've reached me, I heard you, I want to move on. 90% of emails are never opened. It's kind of interesting. Now, this is data from Michael Brenner at NewsCred. You can argue with him if you want to argue the actual data. But the point is that's the environment that we are being forced to deal with, first world problem. On the right-hand side, this is kind of the environment around us. And I like this. It's an internet meme that's running around right now. I won't make a political comment, but the reality is there's always stress. So what's happening? We're getting overwhelmed, and we're changing. All right? There's some evidence now that the attention span we have, we used to give maybe 12 seconds, in an online space to a screen. Some people say you only have 5 seconds to have your message hit, but there's some evidence and some research that's been done that talks about our attention span dropping from 12 seconds to 8 seconds. And the reason for that goldfish behind us is there is, in fact, some evidence that the average attention span of a goldfish is 9 seconds. I don't know how you measure that, but folks are telling me that this is, in fact, the reality of the market, which is we as humans are completely overwhelmed. We've got so much coming at us, and those companies that are finding ways to provide solutions to us as people to make our lives easier are the ones that seem to be having the most impact. You've got scenarios out there where there's some evidence that 70% of the content budget that you're putting out there is kind of being wasted because people are not using it. You have further evidence out there that 73% of people who are surveyed wouldn't care if the brands they use disappeared from their life. That kind of is struggling to me. It's a problem because what's the relevance of the brand? This is kind of marketing has a marketing problem, is one of the sentences I've heard out here. And then when you look at this, I love this shot, because it used to be that people needed products to survive, and now products need people to survive. But the reality is we're all chasing the same set of people, right? And we're chasing them still with admittedly mass market tools. We're trying to understand how to use all the information that we've got out there. And there are some interesting things happening in the marketing market that I want to spend a couple minutes walking through. One of the things that we're still trying to do is figure things out. So as an industry, we're trying to understand what should we be doing and how should we be reacting. You can go to Google Trends at any point in time and plug in a term and see kind of the search results and news headlines. That's what I looked at here. And that top arrow is like a peak of interest. So quite literally, we're just now in the peak for big data and omni-channel in terms of news headlines. So it's frustrating to me because this is how I feel about big data. I mean, enough with this already. It's here, it's real, it's massive, it's growing. And don't forget, by the way, that it's not just marketing data. You've got all these measurement tools that are coming. Some of you may have heard conversations I've given about this before, where you've got things like the Fitbit and things on your wrists and object augmentation, and the smart cars are coming. All of these things are generating enormous streams of data. You've got the ability to, from your phone, turn on your alarm at home or take a video of, is your dog happy? And, all the things that are happening. You have all kinds of sensing devices hitting in the technology and in the supply chain. But the way in which we as an industry are trying to integrate and use all this information is still fractured, is the best way I can describe it, in part because of how we are structured. However, we're also seeing the money begin to move. And that's one of the interesting things that has been talked about before. This Gartner analyst, I can't remember her name, I apologize. This was a quote that caused a lot of stir back a while. At a conference in August, at the MarTech conference up in Boston, she mentioned that, she was wrong. If it's not at a run rate here in 2014 already, it will be there in 2015, that the CMO is already going to be spending more on IT than the CIO. I've had conversations with folks in the consumer packaged goods world in terms of the investments being made, particularly at the large-scale organizations, to try to harness this data, to try to fundamentally change the way in which we use this information to the benefit of human beings. And I think Melissa had it right in the sense that this looked like the year we're going to finally stop waiting and put this to use, and on we go. There are enormous number of small organizations, or let's call them nimble organizations, that are doing amazing things, but the at-scale part is still the struggle. And Melissa was talking about the fact that the hope was, and the thought was, that we would be in a position.
Change it to this. What's happening is the expectation was that we were hoping that we could be able to break down silos and really get things to change. Yes and no. As I said, there's all kinds of investment happening in the marketplace, and I want to talk a little bit about the marketing market and where things are going and what's happening, because I think it's informative. I know many of you have probably seen this conversation prism. If you haven't, it's really interesting. Brian Solis put this out. On the left-hand side there, that's kind of the original conversation prism. It represented several hundred, actually close to 900 if I remember correctly, different companies and logos, and breaking down what was going on in the marketplace with brand in the center. It's been changed now, and on the right-hand side, this is the most recent one that they've produced and released in 2013. Interesting that from 2009 to 13, not a huge number of years, 122 companies and logos dropped, 111 added. So there's an enormous amount of change, particularly for those of us in CPG who tend to test and learn, tend to want to try something during a budget cycle before next year. Just when we begin to figure something out, there's something else. We all know this to be the case. This is the reality of what we're dealing with. So there's kind of this baffling complexity in the marketing space. And you also see I won't inundate you with the marketing landscape, but if you don't know Chief Martech, you should. There's terrific stuff that is being written there all the time. Then you've got Illumiscape, and my favorite was now let's make it look like a transit system in terms of all the different ways that we have to understand and track and manage and attempt to put to use the information and data that is coming at us with such frequency. So you have to step back and say why, right? What's going on here? Why do we have all of this, massive change and all of this information attempting to harness the changed consumer? Well, it's actually pretty simple. Follow the money. If you don't attend to Mary Meeker's presentations, you should. They're always published. The Internet Trends presentation she does on an annual basis is one of the biblical references. But this is really the case where if you look at the yellows here, this is about time spent by humans in the medium and then dollars spent by companies through the medium. And there's a very large advertising dollar opportunity. So you've got a lot of companies that have been created and funded that have the notion of helping you better manage your advertising spend, give you new ways to understand and give you consumer insights to help you better manage your advertising spend, et cetera, et cetera. So part of the gold rush of all these companies and all the funding and all the dollars flowing into the marketing space is because there is this huge opportunity because the landscape is fundamentally changing. The way in which people interact with companies and with their environment is changing. The way in which we as marketers need to address people is changing, and we're continuing to scramble, very much so. When you look at the way in which companies are attempting to move, it's very difficult for us to keep up. People have moved far faster than we, particularly in a larger scale business, can do so. This was a survey done where they were asking about, are you going to increase the use of data-driven marketing over the coming year? Well, yeah. I mean, literally everybody said yes. David Rabb talked about the fact that in 2014 we were going to see a 60% revenue growth around marketing automation on top of a 50% growth for both 2012, 13, et cetera. And then you actually look at the adoption of these automated marketing activities by company size, and you see that at the larger scale, the adoption rate is higher, still not 100, right? But the adoption rate is higher in part because there's no choice. There's no way to manage through efficient and effective delivery if you don't put some level of automation in because there's just things move too fast, right? And you also have buying desks, and you've got the micro auctions that are going on in all the digital space. You've got this enormous kind of freight train moving forward where it's about increasing efficiency. And that's terrific, right? Increasing efficiency in terms of how you reach people and the messaging that you provide and being intelligent about targeting and rapidly being able to shift targets and being able to effectively reach people because I know who they are, I've tagged them, I've cookied them, although cookies are beginning to go away, or I have access to them in first-party data, whatever it happens to be. If I can increase the relevancy of my message, I do, in theory, win. But right now, still a lot of this programmatic marketing and the opportunities that are out there are chasing pure efficiency. And with the kind of dollars that are being spent and the amount of efficiencies that can be gained when you start looking at kind of classic measurements about how out of tune we are with much of the media coming at us, if you can increase efficiencies at all, it's huge savings for companies. So that's happening, but we're struggling still as corporate entities to really get to the point of having that fundamental shift in the way in which we think about things. Sean Gooden at Clorox, he put together a bit of a presentation up at Martech as well, which I really liked because one, it's hip and new in word cloud, but it's also this is the reality of our world inside CPG companies, inside retail companies. It's not unusual to be broken down into folks that are concerned about marketing, concerned about data, IT and data sometimes being separate, and then you have the whole process dimension, and everybody is talking somewhat in that different language. And it's not because of lack of success. I mean, people have grown up in their careers, particularly more senior folks. You get to a point where you understand your sphere of influence. The challenge is all of this stuff needs to meld, and instead of conversations around the kinds of words you're seeing here, what needs to happen is we need to change to a fundamental change in terms of business value. How are we going to leverage all that data through that new technology in the right process, using marketing efficiently in order to create value for the end user or our consumers, the folks who are buying, right? Very easy for somebody like me to say, very simple for us to go, yeah, that's right, right? But the change of perspective like this is never easy, particularly at scale. And part of the reason for that is, no surprise again, here we are. We are siloed. And that those silos made a lot of sense, and they are easier to manage from the command and control, and all the kinds of things that are going on, except they don't mesh with a customer-first approach, with an individual consumer, person buying product. I'm talking very much here business to consumer. B2B is a whole other range of topics, but there as well, things are changing. I actually think we're seeing some changes there a little bit faster in some ways. But we are siloed. I don't think anybody at all believes that there's a linear path to purchase in any way, shape, or form anymore. It's a path, it's a purchase pretzel at best. But yet we have had trouble and struggles with breaking the silos and breaking the funding sources. Whenever you start playing with budgets at large consumer packaged goods companies, you've got challenges. So that's the reality. And yet when you look at the marketing mavens and how we think about things, the notion of the age of the customer, or the notion of, in my word, people-powered economy, is where we are. I'm sure that's not my word. Somebody, I'm sure, said it. But you've got to start and end with the human being, with what it is that they want. So effectively communicate with the person, make it a relevant message, deliver it in the appropriate context. And this whole notion of becoming customer obsessed is something that Forrester's been talking about now for a couple of years. And then most recently, this whole notion of the future of cross-channel one-to-one marketing at scale. Right? So we're starting to make the right noises about how we need to change and adapt. But when you start thinking about what consumers are doing and how we as companies and as an industry are reacting, we're still struggling a bit.
Larry,
John,
yeah,
go ahead.
Yeah, the question came in here. Is it conceivable that the amount of data, with all its marketing and privacy implications, will eventually lead to a significant backlash at some point in the far future? If so, what can be done now to avoid this?
Backlash. It's interesting. I think those of you who haven't had a chance to in all your spare time, digest the FTC report came out at the end of May on data brokers. There was interesting kinds of conversations about this notion of how much is being collected by whom and what's being done with it. We as an industry are trying self-policing. You've got the ad choices. You've got the attempt to increase transparency, but the reality is that transparency is nowhere near where perhaps it ought to be. So you have a debate, privacy versus utility. You're always going to have privacy advocates. You're always going to have certain kinds of consumer groups bemoaning the fact that people know too much about your habits and behaviors and evil activities can occur. I share the paranoia, but I also think that as an industry, and not just CPG, but all of us, as we continue to demonstrate the value that can be provided by better comprehending what you as an individual human being desire based on your express preferences, particularly if I can get first-party data, in other words, information that you're willing to share with me, my company, because my company is doing something for you that you value, you diminish the potential problems that occur. Data breaches, those kinds of things, they're there, they're real, they're hysteria, appropriately, because damage can be done to an individual. So it's education of the population in terms of how we should and shouldn't be cautious with our own personal information. And I actually foresee that somewhere along the line here we're going to get some companies and startups and industry around putting me in control of my data. I own my data. It's about me. If you want it, company X, compensate me. Compensate me with better pricing. Compensate me with special deals. The whole loyalty side of the world. There are things I think that will be coming to change how human beings feel about the information about themselves and how it gets shared. But that's a societal change that's going to take a while. For the moment, just do it right. If it's first-party data that you have opt-ins for, you're in great shape. Be cautious with all the appending that you do. Ensure that you are as transparent as you possibly can be. And most of all, make sure that the human being that's interacting with you is feeling, wow, that was cool, instead of that was a little creepy. That's that whole creepy, cool knife edge that we all walk. If I show up at a retailer and a retailer is able to help me by giving me the list that I did last time to make my shopping experience better, I don't perceive that as, wow, they knew too much about me. I perceive that as, thank you. And that's kind of the mantra that I would have going forward, and how we use all this information is, if the customer's reaction to it is, why, thanks, that made my life easier, all of a sudden the privacy concerns become less of an issue. And I could go off on an hour on that, but I won't, John. Okay. It's hard for me to answer a question shortly. So let me keep going here, and please do, I get on a soapbox and start to go, but feel free to interrupt with whatever questions as they come in, John. I like to just chat.
Right.
What's happening here, and Forrester went there, is you've got a change in the way the world operates. You go back into the 50s and 60s, you had, in theory, this attention abundance. Somebody would actually sit and watch the television because they couldn't change the channel. They didn't have VHS, DVRs, et cetera. Dating myself, VHS, right? And there was information scarcity. This is the old, used car sales model, where the information was in the hand of the salesman, and you as the consumer were kind of at their mercy, and they're going to go check with the manager, right? Well, that information power dynamic has fundamentally changed to where now, as a human, as a buyer, as a consumer, and I hate the word consumer, by the way, but as a human buying stuff, you have far more information than you ever had before, up to the point of overload, but you don't have a whole lot of time or attention because there's attention fatigue. So how do you, as a company, how do we alter the way in which we market to folks, and how do we really get into it in a different manner? I think we all have heard the world of omni-channel. If you look at that little black and white photo on the right, yes, you need to put that human being in the center because they're interacting with you in whatever way they choose. You are not in control. Let that go. But yet, if you look to the left here, it's still very true that a lot of our structure is channel-centric and it's not customer-centric. And this is starting to change without any question. To some of you, I'm sure I'm preaching to the choir. But when Forrester goes out and does a little bit of an examination at the tail end of a Q3 of 13 and still has 58% of CMOs saying that their current organizational structure hinders their ability to adapt to today's marketing environment, I would challenge any of you on the phone who haven't seriously considered restructuring the organization, and not just the words about how we market, but where people are and how people are empowered to act within the organization, because we really need to change it in order for marketing to really work going forward. This marketing is a part of all of this, part of everything. So this is their notion, Forrester, and thank you for it. I'm stealing it, but the customer has changed forever. We know this. And the impact of technology on the fundamentals of the customers in the business, I really like to think about this as the impact of technology on our ability to better understand the reality of how our customers interact with us. right? And remember the Vatican shot, right? That power is in the hands of the humans. They now control so much more of this interaction and so much more of how we as brands and companies and marketers need to interact with them, need to give them what it is that they want. Because one of the other things that's real, which is fun to look at in terms of data, I'm an old data geek, could you tell, when you actually take a look at something like this. This is a study called Engaging the Selective Shopper, tail end of 13. Some of you, I'm sure, may have seen this. But the reality is when you're here with 35,000 average UPCs in a store, and the human over the course of a year is buying but 260 of them, in other words, 0.7% of the items available in the average grocery store ever make it into any individual's cart. And obviously this is an average, so there are people that are higher and people that are lower. But less than 1% is the takeaway here. And then if you look on a quarterly basis and you look on a weekly basis, it's stunning in terms of the taxonomies we set up for the aisles and having available to everybody all this choice, when in fact the individual going down that aisle is literally picking up 1% of the options that are there. Inefficient. But it speaks very highly to how unique we are. This was my favorite. Now, Catalina and the folks are using this as an idea for understanding customers because they are unique. But the reality here was that they had 32 million consistent shoppers tracked for 52 weeks, representing $55 billion worth of sales, and no two individuals had the same assortment. That's stunning to me. I mean, it isn't. I know that I don't buy what my neighbor buys, and we all kind of know this, but if you actually look at the data, you begin to think, this is really about that individual. Yes, we still put cardboard in the stores, and we still have impulse buying going on, and all the things that are true about what it is that we do, but we are still in a situation where, on aggregate, the volume of what is going on at store level and the importance of what is going on to any individual that walks through the front of that store, okay, if you want to argue with 1%, less than 5% of the items in any given store matter. It's interesting. And now we have our media spends as well. This is another study. I'm not really pitching Catalina here. Just I happen to like these particular studies. This was Deconstructing Demographics version 2. This was not thousands and thousands of brands. This was a series of selected brands. But I suspect that this is true in many more cases, that our demography, the way in which we bought media forever and ever and ever, and mass, gross demographic targets, women 25 to 54, still too much of that happening, although there's a really radical change underway for many customers in the CPG space in terms of how they're working with their agencies and how they're making their buys, and the degree to which, particularly in the digital world, they are changing their spending to increase their efficiency dramatically. But this is why. The reason why is that these demographies, the targeting, et cetera, you really are missing a substantial portion of the universe of your buyers if you limit yourself from a targeting perspective. Of course, there's spill. When you run advertising against a demographic, you do hit others, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But there's this notion that 2/3 of the exposures of the ads in this test went to people that represent maybe 2% of the total volume, and only 1/3 of that was hitting people that represented close to 98% of that volume. This is really what the digital marketing opportunity is, what the digital marketing spending is all about. How do I fine-tune programmatically my marketing spend so that I hit the right people more often? But that's only part of the success criteria, if you will, because it from a person's perspective, I've always loved this quote. From a person's perspective, we are all so stressed for time. It's which companies, which brands, which services, which opportunities can make the most of my time. Rashad was talking about specifically around content, but I'm talking about utility as well. Who's going to make it easier for me? That's why you have so many things going on in terms of buy it online, pick up in store. Target in their most recent a quarterly earnings call, spoke about the fact that one of the interesting things about buy it online and deliver in store is they were pick it up in store, is they were seeing that for folks who were doing that pickup, fully 20% of the people who are doing the pickup in store increased their cart. In other words, they picked it up in store, but then they did some additional shopping. So this whole notion of how we interact with our individual consumer and buyer, and how I drive a trip mission, and how we bring people into a store, and how we get them engaged with us, it's all about time. It's all about what makes the most sense. And the value of that to each individual person is fundamentally different. And I'll go all the way back here, which I think is kind of funny for me. Yes, it's a hardcover. Yes, I still have it on my shelf. It came out in August of 1993, 2 decades ago, right? And one-to-one was the mantra. And the one-to-one future, Peppers and Rogers. And if you actually just pick that up and scan the chapter headings and the kinds of questions that were being asked, you'll find amazing consistency with what the world is like today and what is going on today. But you'll also find how different the publishing world was. We had Dick Cavett. I think we're aging ourselves as one of the people on the back who was speaking about this as an eye-popping idea. I think where we now are is that the concepts, the ideas expressed, those many years ago, the technology just wasn't there. The technology has now caught up to allow us to truly operate in this much more direct way at scale. So now what you hear from the marketing market is person level, right? That's where it's all about, right? Targeting and measurement across channels, formats, and devices at the person level. That's it. I showed you this quote a minute ago. I had an opportunity to spend some time with Bob very recently up at Kraft, and without going into any inappropriate detail, 18-month process to get to the point where they are able to do what Bob was talking about in his quote. The content platforms that Kraft, with a lot of people at Starcom, et cetera, are building, they're radically different in terms of the way in which they're approaching how to go to market. I think in their case, because of the access to an enormous set of data and enormous number of people, and the ability to target very finely within that group and understand behaviors, you literally are doing what he's talking about, which is how do I enable experiences that are appropriate and unique to the individual and makes that person feel valued, right? How do you make the guest feel important is something that Target talks about. How do you ensure that that individual that you're engaged with is getting value from you and appreciating what it is that you are trying to tell them and market to them? I think there's a fundamental difference between the whole programmatic media that is really taking hold and being in a position to actually use the data and use the information in a logical and an effective way to really drive business. I think it's very important for us as an industry to constantly go back to, what does that human want? What is it that we wish to have that human feel, and I do mean emotionally, feel about our product and service, such that we can give them an opportunity to appreciate how we operate with them, and that's where it needs to go. If we approach it purely from, I'm going to get X number of basis points additional return from advertising spend because I'm targeting someone who's the exactly appropriate lapsed user on a behavioral basis, nothing wrong with that. But if that's the end goal, things don't change. And I think fundamentally it comes down to something fairly simple to me, and this is kind of the thing I want to touch on here. Digital disruptions happened. We're at the point where there is no longer a question. This is the way of the world. People are truly overwhelmed in the daily cacophony of what's going on in there. And yet it's about recognition, right? I mean, if you look at all the books in the aisles at Barnes & Noble, I almost said Borders, or at Amazon, and start looking at leadership books and self-help and a lot of it comes down to individual humans wishing to be recognized as an individual, wanting to be treated as if they were unique, special, different, or just simply appreciated. And there's a whole lot of evidence that says that there's value in that. Perhaps it's soft value. Perhaps the CFOs are not really, unless I can measure it, able to support me totally in that. But the reality is that's what people want. So this whole notion of marketing one-to-one, which is the way it's been expressed for 20 plus years, one colon one. I think that by just shifting that a bit, moving instead from the one-to-one to just a slightly different concept, 2 letters, marketing one by one, which means if I show up at your website, if I show up at your front door, if I show up at your cash register, treat me differently than the person standing behind me in line, or treat me differently than the person who shows up 2 nanoseconds later to your website because you know something about me. Treat each person as the unique human that they are. And how do you constantly refresh and constantly learn what people need? Sometimes they tell you, which is great. Sometimes, obviously, you have to observe. Sometimes you're living in the tenuous world of projection and modeling, which is not a bad thing because it can help you actually execute and act and then learn more. But how do you constantly change that focus to be able to meet the needs of the individual human? And how do you learn from each and every interaction how to improve that focus? There are many conversations to be had around how to do all these things. But today it was setting it up so that we can have the beginning of this conversation about it is about treating each person as if they mattered, which is what, go down to customer service. Why does it matter? Because each and every person does matter, even if some of them are an enormous pain in the rear end to deal with. So I think what the message for me today is all about in terms of how we think about technology and how we think about big data and how we think about digital, and stop, step back and think about humans. Because at the end of the day, that's what we are, and that's how we interact, is as humans, with all of our complexity and emotional content and unconscious decisions. 80+% of all the decisions we make are unconscious, so that if I ask you why'd you do it, you probably can't tell me. So some of it has to be observational. But this is the fundamental change I think that needs to take place in the marketplace, is how we observe and understand and interact on a one-by-one basis so that the people that we're interacting with feel as though we actually care that they're spending their money with us. Very challenging at scale, right? It's much more likely to be able to make something like this occur at the local non-chain restaurant where you walk in and George says, "Hi, Mr. Burns, nice to see you. Thanks for coming in." That's very different than trying to operate at scale, but I think that's kind of the direction that we need to be going, and the direction that we need as an industry to be thinking more about. So this was, believe it or not, the last slide I wanted to take us through today, with an idea and a goal towards having a chance for questions and having an opportunity to open it up and have a discussion and a conversation about some of the stuff that I may have thrown out here, because I'm curious. We have a jury of our peers here. I'm curious as to what you guys think about this, how it's resonating, and if what we're talking about makes sense. So I'd love to entertain any questions, and I know you must have some. So John, please.
Sure. How much longer will privacy remain a major issue in the marketplace today?
How about if we say forever? And part of the reason that I say that is because you've got, let's just, did I think perhaps privacy was going to come up as a question? You've got a huge issue in the marketplace today. And it's going to always be there because, if it bleeds, it leads, right? So privacy is something, when there's a problem with it, it scares people. And legitimately so. I mean, there are bad actors in the world. But it's not a simple scenario. It's extraordinarily complex. As you begin to move towards more, I'll call it omnipresent, regardless of device, personality, right? So I log in with Facebook, and I'll use that as an example. On this device, that device, this device, that device, it all gets connected. You're going to have even more potential issues for privacy, and I don't think it's ever going to go away. I mean, I can't remember I haven't looked in a while, but there were hundreds of bills in state legislatures moving forward, let alone at the federal level. I think the only hope we have is self-regulation. I think U.S. could do well to take a closer look at some of the EU standards, which are a bit more strict. Doesn't mean you can't operate, just means you have to operate within tighter confines. And literally, as long as you are gaining permission at the best of your ability to do so from the individuals that you're interacting with, you should be protected from, let's call it, liability. But I mentioned as well the reality of the FTC notice. When you have the commissioner of the FTC open her report on data collection online and offline with a quote from Othello, which is literally this is the first line of her statement in the 150-page document about a call for transparency and accountability. There's really, they get it. It's actually a great piece if you want to read about what's going on in data and handling. It's not, I shouldn't say it's a great piece. It's a fairly comprehensive. I think there are some things that are missed in the report. But there's a lot of attention being paid to this. I think given last Tuesday's election, regardless of how one may feel about that, the desire for increased regulation will be minimized, but I don't know how long that's going to be. So I think you're always going to have privacy be an issue until we have generational change. Because if you look at the kids, my children, my oldest is 25, privacy rarely comes into it. It's like, don't be stupid, but it's not about privacy for them. It's about what value can you give me for my time. And if you can give me value by knowing something about me and being able to instantaneously address my need, that's appreciated. I think that's where it's going to go. But privacy is never going to go away as an issue.
Okay.
Personal opinion.
Another question. Based on your start sampling business, how has shopper behavior online changed over time?
Ooh, interesting. Shopper behavior. I think that the reality of the changes we've seen literally in the path to purchase, right? We've kind of witnessed that within the microcosm of sampling. It used to be that you put something out and it would just fly, and it was new and it was interesting. And what I mean by that is you get a high volume of take rate, and things would get, we'd have to be very, very concerned with controlling the speed and the frequency of sample delivery. We still do if it's a small number of samples, but if it's a large-scale sampling program, given the plethora of choices and the literally billions of websites, if you don't have an intelligent media campaign in support of your sampling program, you will not be successful. So from a shopping behavior standpoint, what that suggests to us is that the choice that consumers have, the number of places that they can go, the number of things that they can be engaged with, it's very, very difficult to break through, which is part of the reason why we spend a lot of our time talking about sampling. Is one of those few situations where when you put something physically in the hand of a human being, they get that full personal experience with the brand. That's very compelling in this particular world today where everything is so splintered and scattered. But it's more difficult to attract them and bring them to something that may be of use for them because of the distractions. So to me, when I look at shopper behavior, you're seeing a lot more distraction in the behavior, and obviously no longer anything linear about the path. I also think that we've seen some interesting changes in terms of lists and how people are supporting pre-planning more so as they look at the opportunities to get into things. They are much more likely to plan. But I think that's more economic. 50% or somewhere around that level of the American population runs out of cash before the end of the month. So for a lot of people in this country, speaking, U.S.-centric, they have to make very hard decisions on even small purchases. So I think shopping behavior, that's the kind of stuff, it's the macro stuff we're seeing that has impacted us. Obviously, mobile, right? People are interacting in fundamentally different ways. All the trends and things that you see in my microcosm of sampling, we see it happening, and in some cases earlier. Although I will tell you one funny quick story. Since we measure where a human being is placing an order from, whether it be laptop, desktop, tablet, et cetera, we still see a fairly high level of desktop sampling ordering for online sampling, and that's because people are still doing it at lunch right now. I should let you guys go so you can order samples online. But other than that, it's just kind of interesting things that we see. Much of what we're seeing in sampling kind of mirrors what's going on more broadly. Again, a very long-winded response.
Okay, well, that was excellent, Larry. Thank you very much. For those attendees who have more questions for Larry or want to continue the dialogue with him, you can email Larry Burns at larry_burns@startsampling.com. For more information about the Shopper Technology Institute, please visit www.shoppertech.org. Our next presentation is Joint Business Planning and Maximizing Trade Spend ROI. It'll begin on the hour. Hope you can join us in about 7 or 8 minutes. This is John Karolewski signing off for Start Sampling and STI.